Hi, my name is Adam Scott Bellis. I'm a blogger from the Jerusalem Post. I'm also an American Olé. For me, I was a product of conservative day school, and by the time I was 18 and going off to college, I was pretty disenfranchised. The thing that kind of clinched my return to a stronger Jewish identity was when my parents forced me to go on the March of the Living and then to Israel for the first time. So we've kind of touched on it towards the end, but I wanted to know how each of you, and I'm sure it's going to be very different from each of you, how do you feel Israel plays a role today in people's Jewish identity? And if it does, how do you think it solidifies it? Because for me, it changed everything. I mean, I've made Aliyah after 5 years, of being back and forth. So, I'm interested to see what you guys think about that. Because for me, I think it's a major role.
I'd actually like to take another couple of questions so that the panelists can answer. Yes. Can we get a mic? Me too.
Hi, thanks all. Jonathan Weinstein, University of Virginia, and I work at Nuva Corporation. I was recently privileged enough to sit on 2 meetings. The first one was with the director of Hillel International, and in talking about the American Jew, the main point of his speech was that Judaism is not a religion. But nonetheless, it would be absurd to question this man's identification with the Jewish culture, with the Jewish tradition. And the second meeting was with Michael Steinhardt, CEO and founder of Birthright. And his main message was that he is a Jewish atheist, but nonetheless very committed to the preservation of the Jewish tradition, and obviously an integral force in trying to maintain those connections between Jews of the diaspora and bringing them to Israel. And so my question is twofold. One, can you flesh out a little bit more how you see the atheist Jew operating and reconciling internal differences? What is it that gives the Jew that specific and special capability to be atheist? And then 2, how do you see the atheist Jew fitting into the newly emerging world order of Judaism? Thanks.
On the left. Sorry, you're in the shadows. With the lady in the...
Hi, my name is Shira. I'm an Israel Fellow at Hillel Montreal. My question is, we're sending a lot of people to discuss with the young American Jews or not Israeli Jews, that's what my job is, to discuss with them about Israel and Judaism. My question is, how do you see it going backwards from the Jews of North America, of the diaspora generally, coming to Israel to share their thoughts about the Jews outside of Israel?
Okay, we'll take one more.
Thank you. It was an exciting listening to you. I'm a Sabra, a Jerusalemite. My name is Inon Shenkar. I wondered if after the creation of the State of Israel and having Operation Moses with the Ethiopians coming here and some other excitements, what's going to be the next one for us? And as we speak in Africa at the moment, a Jewish trait of Brit Milah is saving the lives of millions of Africans. And I wondered if anyone here in the room knows about Operation Abraham, which is absolutely not known to Jewish people around the world, but has become the exciting next thing for entrepreneurs and Jewish young people because of the pluralism that has been spoken here. And my phrasing the question is as to what could make a difference, in your opinion, in bringing Israelis and Jews from around the world to try to support specifically activities in the wider world, and maybe specifically in Africa, in the context of development and saving lives of AIDS. If you do not know, Operation Abraham is the possibility of Israeli surgeons and nurses going now to Africa to train local teams of medical and nursing professionals how to do the Brit. And this is not a promotion for a project, it's for the concept.
We've got the questions. So we've got a whole playlist going, and hopefully we'll have a chance to take some more questions. But we've got activism within the wider Jewish world, atheism, the birthright game changer, and Israel as a game changer. Who would like to respond first? Dania.
So I want to speak both to the question about atheism and Shira's question, if I understood it correctly, which was about the influence of American Judaism on Israel, which is that, she's not that good. So I think one trend that has been going on for a little while, at least here, that I think is very, very interesting is the increasing interest of Chiloni Israelis, of secular Israelis, in studying Torah. And that there's this idea that whatever you do or don't do on Shabbat, whatever you do or don't do with kashrut, that you can sit and go to a Beit Midrash type situation and learn, and that there's something powerful and exciting and fascinating there that may or may not inform what happens when you walk out the door. And these texts that people are learning are deep and exciting, and so I think probably for a lot of people, the reason that they are coming back a second or third or fourth or 10th time is because they do touch them in some deep way, deep personal, human way, emotional way, you know, whatever. And I think that's some of the way that the tradition has a lot of possibility now for engaging Jewish atheists. It's like, come, learn, be at the table, you know, sit and debate and disagree as we have been doing for thousands of years. But be part of the conversation. And, you know, use the metaphor I used earlier of showing people around the room, like, here, come see what's around the room and decide for yourself what that means. Yeshayahu Leibovich, the philosopher, said that, you know, some of what has characterized Judaism for all this time has been not what people believe. That's, you know, not really, it is one way of understanding Jewish theology, but rather what people do. And people will make whatever choices they're going to make once they leave the Beit Midrash or the room in which engagement happens, but it isn't necessarily about thought control. You know, at least from the time of the Yiddish theater, we have a great tradition of secular, Jewish, passionate, cultural, intellectual, somewhat religious engagement, and it's going to look like a lot of different things, but I think it's, you know, a totally viable part of the conversation.
Just very briefly, I think that combining two of the questions, Israel is at the core of who we are today and who we will be in the very near future. I think that unfortunately for the ones of you coming from America, you have been extremely important in Jewish life and society for decades. You're still very, very strong, but I think that the future of the Jewish people looks more like Israel than the United States, and I'll explain myself. I think that assimilation, unfortunately, is a huge trend in the United States. Europe, by the way, and Jewish communities in Europe are pretty much extinguishing themselves, and the reason why we're still around is because there's strong anti-Semitism, and that makes us, you know, you have to resist to that. But at the end of the day, it's all about Israel. It's the society that represents us the most. It's plural. It's a mosaic of many different tendencies and cultures, and each one has an expression over here. It's a balagan, as we all know, in many, many senses. It has a lot to be improved. But ultimately, that's, I think, who we will look like in the near future. And of course, it will be an Israel full of solidarity towards the rest of the world. And this sort of Operation Abraham is a good example of that. So most important thing to do is to foment Aliyah and to stay connected. This is why Mr. Steinhardt, although he calls himself an atheist, is probably the biggest Jew that you can imagine, because he's really doing what it's all about, to make sure that Jews all over the world, especially in North America, understand this bond that there is between the Jewish people that has to do today with Israel.
I work from Yehuda, then we'll take another.
I work for an Israeli organization that's now building a division in North America, and that's the work that I've been doing for the last couple of years. And I actually I'm not convinced that promoting Aliyah is the key to the survival of the American Jewish community. In fact, it's the Jewish community that has had the least percentage of Aliyah of Jewish communities around the world, and that's partly because the American Jewish community, I think, rightly sees itself as the middle of a success story. It even goes back to the whole notion of majority and minority. American Jews overwhelmingly don't see themselves as part of a minority. They see themselves as part of the majority culture. They just have a different ethnic, religious affiliation, if that. I think
though you're talking to somebody from Spain, so if you know, golden ages end.
Right.
So.
Well, yeah, that's, you know, look, I think this is a really important point, because history is not destiny. Right? History is not destiny. And the whole idea of having a panel of people who are trying to be activists on behalf of the Jewish future, the overwhelming majority of which are coming from North America, is that you're putting together folks who are trying to flip the switch on that notion that just because Jewish communities have ended tragically in the past, it means that Jewish communities have to end tragically in the future. I think the goal of all the work that all of us are trying to do is really about building something that is thicker, stronger, and better than the current realities that we necessarily were born with. And I think that's true about personal identity and collective identity.
Okay, Jay and Shannon both want to get a word in before we take the last round of questions.
Sure. So first, people have been predicting the end of the American Jewish community almost as long as they've been predicting the end of Israel, right? I mean, it's always 5 minutes to midnight wherever. I mean, one of us said that whatever it is to be a professional Jew is to be neurotic or nervous and feeling it's the end. You know, it's interesting. I actually think Israel is the food court, right? I mean, this is a place where people are doing Jewish in ways which are completely different from one another, and I actually think, you know, Jerusalem is, like you said, a wonderful example of that. Ironically, it's in diaspora communities, I think, where there's more segmentation, where, you know, so you may, we can talk about the different Edot in Israel as much as we want, but you at least see people on the bus who are doing, or now the light rail, which personally I never thought was actually going to happen. So like riding it yesterday was unbelievable. That was great. That is actually the rich kind of a food court. And I think it's interesting, you know, that there was a question about atheism, because right, we have to, no matter how many iterations of Jewishness we may come up with, and we may think, well, this is the essential one, or this is the essential one, there's definitely someone who has a different one. So I've been really, it's been really interesting interfacing with with Russian-speaking Jews in the United States, who see their Jewishness primarily as an ethnicity, or even as a race, rather than necessarily as a religion, not even as a culture, as we might understand culture, and understanding what it is to be Jewish, you know, as having it stamped on your identity card in a particular category, in ways which are really different, not only on one spectrum, well, I'm over here and you're over there, but a completely different spectrum in a completely different kind of dimension. So I think, and finally, I guess the one last piece I kind of wanted to address was, what can unify all of these different axes of identity and of a belonging? And for me, I do come back to that notion of authenticity, of functionality, of what does it do. For me, the success of Chabad and the Kabbalah Center, which we don't count as a Jewish outreach organization, but numerically has reached way more people than the best funded of our you know, sort of mainstream Jewish organizations, except for Birthright, obviously. Right, the success of Chabad and the Kabbalah Center in the United States, they deliver the goods, right? You can have, I mean, I was Orthodox in my Jewish practice for 10 years. You get the experience, you get the juice. It's not the only way to get that rich, thick experience, but Chabad delivers that. A number of places which are, a number of other organizations which we don't see as progressive, or we don't see as cool. This isn't about fun. It's not that the film festival is more fun than going to tech study. It's what delivers the thickness of richness of human experience that makes it worth the trouble in the first place.
I wanted to say about atheism and Judaism that the way I see it, any school of thought that's been around for thousands of years has a lot of wisdom inside it. If it lasted this long, it has some truth in it for sure. And to understand that, you don't need to be religious. Another very important thing is that if you want to take part in studying this school of thought, it'll be a lot more meaningful to you if it's your school of thought, if it belongs to your ancestors. So you don't have to believe in God or be a practicing Jew in order to feel the Jewishness of the books and of the experience. I mean, it happened here, and our ancestors were part of it. You can be an atheist and still enjoy that, the way I see it. In terms of how American Jews can. So the answer is, Israeli Jews have a million things to learn from American Jews. It will be very hard to hold a panel like this with Israeli Jews. There'll be a lot more shouting, and so we need to embrace democracy like American Jews have embraced it. We need to embrace freedom of speech like American Jews embraced it. We need to accept others, even if it's, sometimes we're going to say it's fake, it's not real, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. We need to understand that other peoples are around us, like American Jews understand it. So if I was working with American Jews, I would point out the problems in the Israeli society that are so trivial for American Jews, and some work over there on that point. And when speaking about minority and majority, I wanted to say that it doesn't always have to be so dramatic. When I was speaking of a minority and a majority identity, I want you to try and understand that when we feel that we need to take to the streets, so it's actually quite simple for us. We, the majority, are all going there and taking to the streets, and that's it, finished. But for you, who are you? You understand? You need support from different various communities, the Liberal Party, the Hispanic side. It's different, It doesn't mean that the American community is going to die. I don't think so. But for us, it's us. It's us, and the rest is minority. So it's different psyche.
Okay, we're going to take just 2 questions. Gil.
Hi, Gil Scheffler with the Jerusalem Post. We also ran a story on the UJA Federation of New York survey, and I think it was very interesting because I was curious to see it. I'm curious what you would have to say to somebody who would cite the findings as proof that there are two in this food buffet of Jewish ideas. There are 2 main stalls: nationalist Judaism, i.e., Zionism, and Orthodox, and specifically ultra-Orthodox Judaism, because the statistics of the survey showed that there's been a sharp decrease in the number of Jews affiliated with Reform, conservative congregations, and assimilation is continuous.
What's the question?
The question is, what would you, in this food stall of buffet of ideas, all those different forms of Judaism that you've cited, are they just flavors of the month? And the only 2 forms of Judaism that have a future are they Zionism and ultra-Orthodox Judaism?
Last question, this lady here. No time for comments. This lady here, please.
Thank you. I'm Charlotte from the Zionist Federation of Denmark. So this is very interesting because there's a big difference between you coming from Israel, North America, and Europe. So my question is, when I hear from you talking about being Jewish around the world, it's very much with your own view at it, being North American, being Israeli, where David has a little different perspective about it. It's more the world. The question is, are you concerned about what it's like being Jewish in a small minority in Europe? With the assimilation and the anti-Semitism that we're dealing with. Is that a kind of a Jewish future you are considering at all?
I mean, I think I love speaking for Danya. I think Danya and I and Yehuda probably are speaking from our experience, because that's what we can offer on this panel. I think, having done a lot of work with European communities as well, where we have points of contact is actually incredibly powerful and important. And the fact that the situations are quite different, for me, it's absolutely the case, and it's definitely something that we think about all the time. Absolutely.
Just real quick. Just real quick. first of all, I don't want to be misunderstood. I have a hell of a lot of respect for the Jewish community of America, of North America, first of all. Secondly, I think that we also have to be smart and look at the megatrends. And unfortunately, assimilation in North America is extremely rapid and it's very problematic. And I think that the ultimate answer to assimilation is Israel. It can be Aliyah, it can be staying very connected, but that's why you talk about this food court of elements. Most of them have to be related to Israel. Secondly, from a point of view of Europe, you know, we know the mess that it is. It's a tough sort of situation, and I'm very grateful to you guys, the organizers, for having placed not only the big communities, Israel and North America, and putting also people that are a minority and that also represent what Judaism has been about, which is to be a minority and how we've kept it together. And we have challenges, but again, Israel is the answer.